What happens when a sense of entitlement at 30,000 feet clashes with unshakable integrity? This isn't just a story about an airline complaint. It's the anatomy of a moment that begins with a single venomous sentence whispered in the hushed cabin of first class. There are just too many of them. This one sentence sets off a chain reaction, drawing in a flight attendant, a decorated pilot, and a family whose quiet dignity becomes the storm's eye. The pilot's response would leave every passenger breathless, but the real story is what happened next, the inescapable, life-altering karma that followed the plane long after it landed. The first-class lounge of Apex Air at JFK was Caroline Sterling's natural habitat. It wasn't merely a waiting area, it was an affirmation. A sleek chrome and onyx sanctuary, where the air, scented with a faint, expensive hint of white tea and citrus, was filtered of the general population's chaos. At 48, Caroline had curated her life with the same meticulous, ruthless precision she applied to her work as a brand consultant for heritage luxury labels. Her clients weren't just selling handbags or watches. They were selling exclusivity, a dream of being separate, above, and better. And Caroline was the high priestess of that gospel. Her silver-blonde hair was cut into a severe architectural bob that framed a face kept taut by a regimen of discipline and expensive treatments. Her cream-colored cashmere travel suit was immaculate, her Valentino rock-stud tote placed just so on the empty seat beside her. She sipped her complimentary champagne, the bubbles fizzing against her tongue, and scanned the lounge. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, weren't appreciating the art or the ambiance. They were cataloging, judging, and appraising. Everyone was a potential brand, and most, in her opinion, were failing. That's when she first saw them. The Williams family. They didn't enter with a clamor. Their arrival was a study in quiet grace that paradoxically drew the eye more than any loud entrance could have. First came the father, Dr. Elias Williams, a man whose tall, elegant frame carried an aura of calm authority. His salt-and-pepper hair and impeccably tailored blazer spoke of a man comfortable with his success. He was followed by his wife, Dr. Annalise Williams, whose warm smile seemed to genuinely light up the space around her. Her vibrant, patterned tufib was a splash of joyful color against her classic navy dress. Finally, their daughter Maya, about 17, with expressive eyes and headphones around her neck, her long braids cascading down her back. They were, in a word, beautiful. A portrait of black excellence and familial warmth. Caroline watched them over the rim of her flute. She saw the lounge attendant greet Dr. Williams by name, a flicker of genuine respect in the attendant's eyes. She saw them settle into a cluster of armchairs, their conversation a low, happy murmur. Dr. Annalise Williams pulled a book from her bag, while Maya showed her father something on her tablet, his deep laugh echoing softly. To anyone else, they were an asset to the room. To Caroline Sterling, they were an anomaly, an intrusion. Her perfectly curated sanctuary suddenly felt crowded. It was an irrational feeling, a prickle of irritation she couldn't immediately place. First class, both on the ground and in the air, was meant to be a refuge of quiet, homogeneous sophistication. Their presence, their relaxed confidence, their number, it felt like a violation of an unspoken rule. She finished her champagne, the crisp taste soured by her thoughts. The boarding call for flight 217 to London Heathrow was a welcome relief. She gathered her things purposefully, striding to the priority lane, expecting to be among the first to board. The Williams family was already there, waiting patiently. On the jet bridge, the feeling intensified. Once inside the cabin, her heart sank. Her seat 2A was a window seat. In 2B, the aisle seat, sat Maya Williams, engrossed in a score of classical music. Across the aisle in 2C and 2D were her parents. Caroline's entire row, her entire immediate vicinity, was occupied by them. She stopped her carry-on, blocking the aisle. A young flight attendant with a bright professional smile, whose name tag read Sarah, approached her. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I help you with your bag?" Caroline offered a tight, dismissive smile. "I'm in 2A. I just need to get settled." Maya, sensing her presence, looked up from her music. "Oh, excuse me," she said, her voice clear and polite. She began to unbuckle her seatbelt to stand. "Don't get up," Caroline said, her tone sharper than intended. She squeezed past her tote bag, brushing unceremoniously against Maya's knees. She stuffed her bag into the overhead bin with more force than necessary and sank into her seat. The scent of her own Chanel No. 5 perfume felt like a thin shield against their proximity. Sarah, the flight attendant, returned. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, Ms. Sterling champagne, perhaps?" Caroline didn't look at her. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. The Williams family was murmuring again, Dr. Williams pointing out something through his window. It was the sound of a family enjoying a moment, but to Caroline, it was an invasive noise. "Is there a problem, Ms. Sterling?" Sarah asked, her smile dimming slightly, sensing the tension. Caroline finally turned her head, her blue eyes locking onto Sarah's. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Yes, there is a problem." She flicked her eyes towards Maya, then across the aisle to her parents. "I just don't understand it. I pay a premium for this cabin, for the experience, for the ambiance." Sarah looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow." Caroline sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "It's just, there are so many of them." She whispered the words, tasting like poison and privilege. "It feels more like a domestic coach flight. It's just not what I expected for international first class." Sarah's professional mask froze. The smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning, horrified understanding. Her training kicked in a series of de-escalation protocols running through her mind, but they all seemed inadequate for the sheer unapologetic bigotry of the statement. She stared at Caroline Sterling, a woman draped in thousands of dollars of clothing, whose soul was uglier than anything she had ever encountered. "Ma'am," Sarah began, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing. She could see Dr. and Mrs. Williams across the aisle, momentarily pausing their conversation, their heads tilted slightly as if sensing the curdled atmosphere. Maya was pointedly looking down at her sheet music, but the set of her shoulders was rigid. They had heard, or at the very least, they had felt the shift. "I need you to fix this," Caroline hissed, her sense of entitlement now fully unleashed. "Move them, or move me. I don't care how, but this is unacceptable." Sarah stood frozen for a beat longer, the hum of the auxiliary power unit filling the deafening silence. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was the first line of defense against an attack on the dignity of her passengers. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was not something she could handle with a complimentary drink or a polite apology. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she met Caroline's icy gaze. "Excuse me for one moment, Ms. Sterling," she said, her voice now dangerously calm. "I need to speak with the captain." The walk from row 2 to the cockpit felt like a mile. Sarah's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and outrage. Every fiber of her being wanted to turn around and unleash a tirade on Caroline Sterling, but her professionalism, drilled into her over years of service, held her in check. This required a higher authority. This required the calm, unassailable command of Captain David Evans. Captain Evans was a pilot's pilot, a 25-year veteran with silver-streaked temples and a reputation for being as unflappable as he was fair. When Sarah slipped into the cockpit and quietly closed the door, he and his first officer were running through their pre-flight checklist. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his eyes not leaving the instruments, but his tone registering her distress immediately. "Captain, we have a situation in the first-class cabin," she said, keeping her voice low and steady. "A passenger in 2A, a Ms. Caroline Sterling, is demanding to be moved. Mechanical issue with the seat entertainment system down," the first officer, Tom, chimed in. Sarah shook her head, feeling a flush of anger rise in her cheeks. "No, sir. She's complaining about the passengers seated around her, the Williams family." Captain Evans finally turned his head, his gaze sharp and focused. "Complaining about what exactly?" Sarah took a breath. "Sir," she stated, "she said there are too many black people in the cabin. She said it's ruining the ambiance and that it's not the experience she paid for." A profound silence descended upon the cockpit. The low electronic hum of the instruments seemed to amplify. The first officer let out a low whistle of disbelief. Captain Evans' expression didn't change, but Sarah saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He held her gaze for a long moment, his eyes seeming to absorb the full, ugly weight of the situation. He had a mixed-race grandchild. This wasn't just a professional issue for him. It was a deep personal offense. "And the Williams family?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're in 2B, 2C, and 2D. I believe they heard her, Captain. They're being incredibly poised, but they shouldn't have to be." Evans finished for her, a hard edge to his voice. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "All right. Tom, continue the checklist. Sarah with me." When Captain Evans emerged from the cockpit, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted instantly. The authority in his posture was palpable. He didn't just wear the uniform, he inhabited it. He walked calmly down the aisle, his presence commanding the attention of every passenger. He nodded politely to Dr. and Mrs. Williams, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement and respect that did not go unnoticed. Then he stopped and turned his full attention to Caroline Sterling. "Ms. Sterling," he began, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of command. "I'm Captain Evans. My flight attendant informs me you have an issue with your seating arrangement." Caroline, who had been stewing in her seat, seemed to puff up with validation. The captain was here. Her problem was being taken seriously. "Yes, Captain. Thank you for coming. As I was explaining to her, this situation is simply not up to Apex Air's standards." "I see," Captain Evans said, his expression unreadable. "And what situation is that exactly? Please tell me in your own words." He wasn't whispering. His voice was at a normal conversational level, but in the quiet cabin it was a broadcast. Every passenger was now unabashedly listening. A flicker of hesitation crossed Caroline's face. Saying it to a flight attendant was one thing. Saying it to the captain in front of the entire cabin was another. But her pride and indignation overrode her caution. "It's the composition of the cabin," she said, choosing her words carefully. I was under the impression that first class was a more curated experience. Curated, the captain repeated the single word hanging in the air. Ma'am, this is a public commercial flight, not a private club. The only requirements for sitting in this cabin are a valid ticket and adherence to safety regulations and basic human decency. He paused, letting his words sink in. He then gestured subtly towards the family she had maligned. "Are you referring to the Williams family, ma'am?" he asked, his voice direct and unwavering. Caroline flushed. "I am simply saying that the ambiance is not what one expects. It's a matter of brand integrity." Captain Evans took a half step closer. "Let me tell you about brand integrity, Miss Sterling. Our brand is built on safety professionalism and respect for every single person who steps on our aircraft, not on a discriminatory and frankly abhorrent notion of ambiance." He then did something that stunned everyone. He crouched down slightly so he was at eye level with her, forcing her to look directly at him. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "The family you are so offended by includes Dr. Elias Williams, a cardiothoracic surgeon who has saved countless lives and is on his way to London to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. His wife, Dr. Annalise Williams, is a leading historian and professor at Yale. Their daughter Maya is a gifted cellist who has just been accepted into Juilliard on a full scholarship." He straightened up his gaze, sweeping over the now silent cabin before landing back on Caroline. "They are not a situation. They are not a detriment to the ambiance. They are esteemed passengers, and we are honored to have them on our flight today. The only person creating a situation in this cabin, Ms. Sterling, is you." A collective silent gasp seemed to ripple through the passengers. Caroline Sterling's face had gone from flushed to a pasty mottled white. She looked cornered, her mask of superiority shattered. "Now," Captain Evans continued, his voice returning to a tone of calm command. "We have two options. Option 1, you can remain in your seat. Apologize to the Williams family for your deeply offensive remarks, and we can all continue to London with no further discussion. Your behavior will be noted in a formal report, but the matter will be closed." He paused, letting the weight of the first option settle. "Option 2, he said, his eyes like chips of ice, "is that you refuse, and in that case your presence on this aircraft is considered a threat to the safety and comfort of other passengers and crew. You will be in violation of federal aviation regulations, and you will be deplaned immediately." He stood there, a pillar of righteous authority. The silence was absolute. Everyone was looking at Caroline, waiting. The choice was hers, a moment of humility or ultimate humiliation. Her pride, the very thing that had fueled her complaint, was now her undoing. She couldn't bring herself to apologize. It was an admission of wrongdoing she was incapable of making. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling with rage. "This is outrageous! I will be reporting you. I will be suing this airline." Captain Evans didn't even blink. "That is certainly your right, ma'am, once you're back in the terminal." He turned to Sarah. "Sarah, please assist Ms. Sterling in gathering her belongings. Have ground security meet us at the jet bridge." He then turned and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will be departing for London shortly. Thank you for your patience." With a final brief nod to the Williams family, he turned and walked back to the cockpit, his back straight, his mission accomplished. The speechless cabin erupted into a low murmur, which then swelled into quiet, spontaneous applause. Dr. Williams simply nodded, a look of profound gratitude on his face. Maya looked from the back of the retreating captain to the horrified face of Caroline Sterling, and a small, slow smile touched her lips. For Caroline, the walk of shame back up the aisle under the scornful gaze of every passenger was just the beginning of her freefall. As the heavy cabin door closed with a solid, definitive thud, the sound seemed to sever the toxic thread Caroline Sterling had woven through the first-class cabin. For a moment, an awkward, uncertain silence hung in the air, the kind that follows a sudden, sharp argument. Then it began. A single passenger in row 4, a man with a neatly trimmed white beard, began to clap. It wasn't a loud, boisterous applause, but a slow, deliberate, and deeply appreciative one. Another passenger joined in. Then another, until a warm, spontaneous wave of applause rippled through the cabin, a collective exhale of relief and a unified salute to the captain's decisive integrity. The oppressive tension Caroline had created didn't just dissipate. It was actively replaced by an atmosphere of warmth and quiet camaraderie. The flight, which had been poised on the brink of an ugly international incident, transformed into something else entirely. It became an impromptu salon at 30,000 feet, a sanctuary of decency. The elderly gentleman in row 3, an elegantly dressed Englishman named Arthur, who had watched the entire exchange with a thunderous expression, was the first to break the renewed silence. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, and walked across the aisle to where Dr. Williams was sitting. "Doctor," he said, his voice rich with a refined British accent. "Arthur Covington. I must apologize on behalf of civilized people everywhere. What you and your family were just forced to endure was an absolute disgrace, a blight on the very concept of travel." He offered a hand. Dr. Williams, genuinely touched, stood to shake it. "Thank you, Mr. Covington. That's very kind of you. We appreciate it." "Not kind at all," Arthur insisted. "Merely necessary. That woman represents a curdling of the spirit that must be challenged at every turn. The captain is a credit to his profession." This act broke the ice completely. A young woman in 1B, a tech entrepreneur, buzzing with energy on her way to a London conference, flagged down Sarah, the flight attendant. "Can you please bring this family a bottle of whatever your best champagne is, and put it on my tab? Call it a humanity dividend." Sarah, whose professional composure had returned, now overlaid with a profound sense of relief, smiled brightly. "Of course, ma'am. Right away. Soon, doctor." Annalise Williams found herself in a deep and engaging conversation with a retired history professor from Chicago, who was fascinated by her research on the Gullah Geechee culture. They spoke for nearly an hour, their shared passion for history, a bridge that spanned the aisle. Dr. Williams, meanwhile, discussed the finer points of cardiovascular innovation with a German engineer who designed medical instruments. Maya, who had borne the initial brunt of Caroline's venomous whisper, found her own quiet solace. Initially, she had retreated into her music, the headphones a shield against the world. But now she felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "You okay, superstar?" Elias asked softly. She nodded, though her expression was troubled. "I don't get it, Dad. Why are people like that?" "We didn't do anything to her." Elias sighed, his gaze full of a wisdom earned through a lifetime of navigating such encounters. "Maya, some people build their sense of self-worth, not by lifting themselves up, but by trying to push others down. They create these tiny imaginary kingdoms where they are the rulers, and anyone who doesn't look or act like them is a threat. Her kingdom is built on exclusion. Our family, our success, our joy. It breaks the rules of her little kingdom. It's not about you, honey. It's about her own profound insecurity." He smiled. "Don't ever let someone else's darkness dim your light. Your music is too bright for that." Maya looked at her father, then at her mother animatedly, talking across the aisle and at the kind faces around her. She felt the knot of anger in her chest loosen. She took off her headphones. For the rest of the flight, she was simply Maya Williams, a brilliant young cellist on her way to a new adventure, surrounded by a cabin of strangers who had in a moment of shared decency become allies. Meanwhile, on the ground, Caroline Sterling's world was contracting into a tight, suffocating spiral of humiliation and rage. The walk from the aircraft to the jet bridge was a gauntlet of silent judgment. She could feel the stares of the other passengers burning into her back. The 2 ground security officers who escorted her were impassive and silent, their professionalism. A cold wall she couldn't penetrate with her sputtering indignation. They led her not back into the serene first-class lounge, but to a small, sterile office designated for passenger incidents. Waiting for her was an Apex Air ground manager, a formidable woman named Maria Sanchez, whose expression suggested she had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. Caroline immediately launched her offensive, her voice shrill with a fury she was no longer trying to contain. "This is the most outrageous, unprofessional, and frankly illegal treatment I have ever received. That captain is on a psychotic power trip. I am an Apex Diamond Elite member. For 10 years running, I spend over $100,000 a year. With this airline, I will have his license. I will have your job. I will own this airline." Maria listened patiently, letting Caroline exhaust her initial volley of threats. She didn't interrupt. When Caroline finally paused, red-faced and breathless, Maria looked down at her tablet and spoke, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Ms. Sterling, I have the full incident report filed by Captain Evans. It has been corroborated by a statement from flight attendant Sarah Miller, and we have already received unsolicited statements from 3 other first-class passengers who witnessed the event." Caroline's blustering faded to a stunned silence. They what? "As per our conditions of carriage section 12, subsection B." Maria continued her tone, as clinical as a surgeon's. "Apex Air reserves the right to refuse service to any passenger who, in the judgment of our crew, poses a threat to the safety order or comfort of our passengers. Your discriminatory remarks and subsequent refusal to comply with the captain's direct instruction fall squarely under that provision." She looked up from the tablet, her eyes meeting Caroline's. "Therefore, your ticket for Flight 217 has been voided. Your status as a Diamond Elite member has been revoked, and effective immediately, you are permanently banned from any and all future travel on Apex Air and our partner airlines." The words hit Caroline with the force of a physical blow. Permanently banned. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an excommunication, an erasure of her status. "You can't do that," she shrieked. "It is already done," Maria said calmly. "Your checked baggage is being removed from the aircraft and will be available at the International Baggage Claim, Carousel 4, in approximately 1 hour. We will not be providing a refund for the unused portion of your ticket, nor will we assist in rebooking you on an alternate carrier. You are, as of this moment, no longer our customer. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a flight to manage." Maria turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Caroline alone in the sterile white box, the silence ringing with her defeat. The security officers escorted her back into the main terminal. The humiliation was a burning fire in her gut. She, Caroline Sterling, who crafted brand identities for global titans, had just had her own identity publicly stripped away. She found a secluded corner near a currency exchange booth and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling. Her first call was to her lawyer, a high-powered corporate attorney named Michael. "Michael, you won't believe the incompetence, the abuse I just suffered." She began launching into her heavily redacted version of events. Michael listened patiently before cutting her off. "Caroline, stop. Let me be blunt. You have zero chance of winning a lawsuit. Zero. The captain of an aircraft has almost absolute authority regarding safety and security. A court will back the captain's judgment 999 times out of 1,000. And if there are witnesses, good God, the discovery process would be a public crucifixion. They could subpoena records, other passenger complaints. Any story you try to spin will be shredded. This is not a battle you can win. Take the loss and pray it goes away." Panic, cold and slick, began to creep past her anger. The London trip. The meeting with James Harrison. It wasn't just another pitch. It was the Ethelred Luxury Group, the keystone to her entire 5-year plan. Missing it was unthinkable. Frantically, she began scouring travel apps for last-minute flights. The prices were astronomical. The only seat she could find, leaving within the next 8 hours, was on a rival airline. It was a middle seat, in premium economy. The indignity was a bitter pill to swallow. She who curated every second of her life for maximum comfort and exclusivity was about to be wedged between 2 strangers for 8 hours. As she completed the booking, her mind raced. This wasn't her fault. It was a conspiracy of mediocrity. A world gone soft where standards were sacrificed at the altar of political correctness. She vowed revenge. She would get to London. She would land the Ethelred contract, and from that new pinnacle of power, she would unleash hell. She would hire a PR firm to destroy Captain Evans's reputation. She would launch a social media campaign against Apex Air. She would find the Williams family and make them regret the day they decided to buy a first-class ticket. Sitting there stewing in the chaotic, crowded terminal, she so despised Caroline Sterling, was utterly blind to the reality of her situation. She thought she was at the beginning of her counterattack. In truth, she was already at the epicenter of a story that was no longer hers to control, a tiny digital ripple spreading across the vast, unforgiving ocean of the internet, about to become a tidal wave that would drown her. 2 days later, in a sprawling corner office that seemed to float above the rain-slicked, slate-grey streets of Mayfair, James Harrison prepared for his 9 o'clock meeting. The office was his sanctuary, a space that reflected the man himself, modern, ruthlessly efficient, yet grounded in a deep respect for history and craftsmanship. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a panoramic view of London's timeless architecture. Another was lined with antique books on horology and design, their cracked leather spines a silent testament to enduring quality. His desk, a vast expanse of polished obsidian, was uncluttered save for a single perfect orchid and a tablet displaying the day's market data. At 52, James was the architect of the Ethelred Luxury Group, a global empire built not merely on acquiring brands, but on understanding their very soul. He preached a gospel of luxury, defined by unparalleled craftsmanship heritage, and above all, an unwavering integrity. This philosophy was not a marketing ploy. It was the bedrock of his existence, forged in the working-class fires of Manchester, and polished by the mentorship of one extraordinary man. James began his day not by reading stock reports, but by reflecting on this principle. The meeting scheduled for this morning was critical. Ethelred's North American presence was stagnating, perceived as stuffy and old world. He needed a visionary, a brand whisperer who could translate Ethelred's essence for a new generation without cheapening it. The portfolio of the candidate Caroline Sterling was undeniably impressive. She was a shark by all accounts, but sometimes you needed a shark to navigate treacherous waters. As he mentally rehearsed his opening remarks, his private line buzzed. The caller ID flashed a name that instantly broke through his corporate armor, bringing a rare, unguarded smile to his face. Dr. Elias Williams. Elias! You old warhorse, you made it across the pond. James boomed, his voice warming with genuine affection. He leaned back in his chair, the city of London becoming a mere backdrop to the voice of his friend. How was the awards ceremony? Did you sufficiently dazzle them with your brilliance, or did you try to hide at the back like you always do? Dr. Williams's rich, familiar laugh came through the speaker, a sound James associated with both immense relief and profound sorrow. It was quite the affair, James. More pomp than a humble sawbones like me deserves. But Annalise was in her element, and it's wonderful to be here. Maya is already planning a military-style campaign to conquer every museum in a 10-mile radius. Give them all my love, James said, and tell Maya the prodigy that Juilliard won't know what hit it. We're still on for dinner Saturday night. Yes, the Connaught, my treat. I want to hear every detail. We wouldn't miss it for the world, Elias replied. His tone then shifted, losing some of its easy warmth. Listen, James, the real reason I'm calling. I know you're a busy man, but I wanted your perspective on something. We had a rather unsavory incident on the flight over. James sat up, his corporate instincts immediately sensing trouble. What happened? Are you Annalise and Maya all right? Briefly, and with a clinical detachment that couldn't quite mask his lingering disgust, Dr. Williams recounted the confrontation with Caroline Sterling. He never used her name, referring to her only as a passenger in 2A. He relayed her words, the complaint about the ambiance, the phrase "too many of them," with a weariness that spoke volumes. He focused less on the woman's venom and more on the exemplary conduct of the flight crew, particularly the captain. This Captain Evans, Elias said, his voice filled with admiration. He was the epitome of grace under pressure. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't grandstand. He simply laid out the facts and stood for decency. He was a leader. In a world where so many people in authority duck and weave, this man stood tall. It was affirming to witness it. He paused. It just troubles me, James, that such deep-seated ugliness still exists so openly. To have Maya see that, it hardens a part of you that should remain soft. James listened, his knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of his desk. Each word from Elias landed like a blow. He remembered with searing clarity a moment 20 years ago. He was a terrified young man in a sterile hospital corridor, his world collapsing. His first wife, Helen, was dying. It was Elias, then a young, audacious surgeon, who had walked toward him not with false platitudes, but with quiet, compassionate honesty. He had performed a radical surgery, a long shot that gifted them 5 more years. In those 5 years, Elias was more than a doctor. He was a friend, a guide, a moral compass. The integrity Elias showed in that hospital became the true north by which James Harrison navigated his entire life. "I'm so sorry, my friend," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so deeply sorry that you, Annalise, and that brilliant young woman of yours had to endure that filth. It's a bloody disgrace, but you're right. Men like that captain are the real measure of character." "Well, I won't keep you from your empire building," Elias said, his voice returning to its lighter tone. "Just wanted to share. We'll see you Saturday." "I'm counting on it," James replied, and hung up the phone. He stood and walked to the window, the story replaying in his mind. The casual cruelty, the arrogance. It was the antithesis of everything he and Elias stood for. It was the poison of prejudice he had fought to leave behind in the grimy streets of Manchester, the very thing he refused to allow into the DNA of his company. He buzzed his assistant. "Chloe, that incident I mentioned yesterday, the one on the travel blog about the Apex flight. Can you find it for me, please?" A moment later, a link appeared on his tablet. He read the story again. "Passenger ejected from first class after racist rant. Flight 217 from JFK 2 days ago. It mentioned a prominent brand consultant, but no name. There was a grainy photo snapped by another passenger, showing a blonde woman being escorted off the plane, her face a mask of indignation. It was ugly. It was precisely the kind of behavior that cheapened everything. His intercom buzzed again, startling him. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Caroline Sterling is here for your meeting." The name still didn't connect. It was just another consultant. He smoothed his tie, compartmentalizing his anger, and slipped back into the role of CEO. "Send her in, Chloe." The door opened, and in walked the woman from the grainy photograph. She was the picture of curated perfection. Her navy blue power suit was tailored to within an inch of its life. Her presentation, bound in supple dark green leather, looked like an object of luxury itself. Her smile was a masterpiece of calibrated confidence and deference. She had spent the last 36 hours in a state of controlled fury, pushing the humiliation of the flight into a locked box in her mind, and channeling the rage into a laser-focused ambition. This meeting was not just a job. It was her redemption, the proof that she was and always would be above the fray. "Mr. Harrison, a distinct pleasure. Caroline Sterling," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. James shook at his mind, reeling. He kept his expression neutral, a feat of immense self-control. It couldn't be. The coincidence was too astronomical. He motioned for her to sit. "Ms. Sterling, welcome. I've reviewed your portfolio. It's very impressive." "Thank you," Caroline said, settling into the Eames chair opposite his desk. "I believe the Ethelred Group is at a pivotal and very exciting moment. My firm is uniquely positioned to help you articulate the future of luxury, to bridge the gap between your storied heritage and the modern consumer." She began her pitch. It was, to his astonishment, utterly brilliant. She spoke with fluid authority about market psychographics, aspirational branding, and the codification of desire. She deconstructed Ethelred's competitors with surgical precision and laid out a multi-tiered strategy that was both audacious and intuitively correct. She was a master. She understood the intricate dance of exclusivity and accessibility. As she spoke, James felt a bizarre, bifurcated reality opening up. He was genuinely captivated by the professional, the strategic genius. She was exactly the shark he had been looking for. Yet underneath her polished words, he could hear the echo of Elias's pained voice. He saw the face of the woman in the photograph. While she was outlining a plan for a new flagship store on Rodeo Drive, he discreetly slid his tablet closer. Under the guise of taking notes, he enlarged the photo from the blog. The image was blurry, but the severe blonde bob, the imperious set of her jaw. It was her, there was no doubt. The dissonance was jarring. How could someone so perceptive about the nuances of brand identity be so utterly blind to the ugliness of her own character? He let her continue for another 10 minutes, allowing her to build her case to climb higher and higher, all while he held the pin that would pop her balloon. The moment she paused, taking a sip of the water Chloe had provided, he saw his opening. He held up a hand, his gesture casual, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within. "Excuse me, Ms. Sterling. An absolutely stellar presentation. Truly. I just have one question, if you don't mind. It's a bit off topic, more of a curiosity." Caroline's smile was unflappable. She was closing the deal. She could feel it. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. Anything." James Harrison leaned forward, folding his hands on the obsidian desk. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and suddenly very, very cold. "How was your flight over from New York?" The question, so simple, so banal, landed in the silent office with the force of a physical blow. For Caroline, the air seemed to rush from the room. The triumphant narrative she had been spinning in her head came to a screeching halt. She saw the trap a perfectly laid snare, but she couldn't see a way around it. Every possible answer was a path to ruin. A tiny, almost imperceptible bead of sweat trickled down her temple, a single flaw in her marble facade. "The flight?" She repeated, her voice a fraction of a second too slow, a shade too high. It was fine, perfectly uneventful." It was the lie that sealed her fate. James Harrison leaned back in his chair, the last vestiges of professional admiration gone from his eyes, replaced by a look of profound disappointment and icy disgust. He knew. He didn't know how Elias's story had walked into his office, but he knew with absolute certainty that it had. This woman, this polished, brilliant vessel of brand integrity, was the person who had tried to humiliate his friend, his mentor, the man who represented the very soul he'd tried to instill in his company. Uneventful. He repeated, his voice soft, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of judgment. "That's fascinating, because I heard there was quite a commotion on Apex Air Flight 217 2 days ago, involving a woman whose professional profile is remarkably similar to yours." The blood drained from Caroline's face. The game was up. The unseen connection, the invisible tripwire she had so arrogantly and blindly crossed had just been pulled taut, and she was about to be flung with breathtaking velocity into the abyss. The silence that descended upon James Harrison's office was no longer a space of professional contemplation. It was a vacuum, dense and suffocating, on the verge of implosion. Caroline Sterling's mind, usually a high-speed processor of strategy and leverage, sputtered and stalled. 1,000 frantic calculations fired at once, denials, deflections, accusations of corporate espionage, a lawsuit for defamation. But each pathway led to the same dead end. The cold, unwavering certainty in James Harrison's eyes was a mirror reflecting her own panicked guilt. He wasn't fishing. He had the catch in the net. I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to," she stammered. The words felt like the end in her mouth, a pathetic, reflexive lie from a cornered animal. Her voice, normally a finely tuned instrument of persuasion, was thin and brittle. James Harrison watched her not with triumph, but with a deep, weary disgust. He had hoped for a fleeting second that she might confess, might show a flicker of remorse. Her denial was more damning than any admission. "Let me be more specific then, Miss Sterling." "So there's no confusion," he said, his voice level, but cutting. "I'm referring to Apex Air Flight 217 from JFK to Heathrow 2 days ago. I'm referring to a passenger who verbally harassed a family, demanding they be moved from the first-class cabin because of the color of their skin. I'm referring to Captain David Evans, a man of considerable patience, having to deplane that passenger for causing a threat to the safety and comfort of others. Does any of that?" He paused, letting the weight of the question land, refresh your memory. Every word was a precise surgical incision, stripping away her layers of carefully constructed artifice. The power suit, the expensive portfolio, the years of building her reputation. It all dissolved, leaving her exposed and shivering in the cold reality of her actions. The blood pounded in her ears, a frantic, trapped rhythm. It was a misunderstanding, she insisted, her voice cracking under the strain. A private disagreement that was grossly mishandled and blown completely out of proportion by an overzealous flight crew. She tried to rally to seize control of the narrative. Frankly, the captain's behavior was unprofessional. I was the one who was mistreated. James almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. Mistreated, he countered. Leaning forward, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You, who want to be the custodian of our brand soul, believe that public displays of bigotry are a private disagreement. You, who just spent an hour talking about aspirational value and consumer trust, think integrity is something to be debated. He stood up and walked around the desk, not menacingly, but as if to close the distance between their two opposing worlds. He stood by the great window looking down at the city below. You see, Ms. Sterling, your presentation was brilliant. On paper, you are exactly what I'm looking for. But a brand is not a strategy document. It is not a logo. It is a promise. It is a set of values lived out every day. The most valuable luxury in this world is not a watch or a handbag. It is integrity. It is character. And on that front you are utterly bankrupt. He turned back to face her. The family you harassed, the family whose presence you found so offensive to your ambience. That was the Williams family. Caroline stared at him, her expression blank. The name was a foreign sound, a piece of data without context or meaning. It was just the name of her obstacle. James's expression hardened. The fact that the name means nothing to you is perhaps the most telling part of this entire sordid affair. Let me enlighten you. Dr. Elias Williams, he said, his voice now ringing with a fierce protective pride, is one of my oldest, most cherished friends. He is my daughter's godfather. He is the man whose genius and compassion gave me 5 more years with my first wife, when every other doctor had given up hope. He represents the absolute best of humanity. And you in your casual, thoughtless cruelty, presumed to judge him and his family as unworthy of sharing your air. The final connection clicked into place with the force of a physical shock. It was over. This wasn't a lost contract. This wasn't a negotiation gone wrong. This was the universe, in a moment of terrifying poetic justice, holding up a mirror. The hard karma she was so certain she could outmaneuver and outrun had not just caught up with her. It had been sitting in the chairman's seat waiting for her all along. Her ambition, her one true God, had led her directly to the altar of her own sacrifice. Our meeting is over. Ms. Sterling. James said, his tone now flat and final, devoid of anger, leaving only a cold, empty void. He walked back to his desk and pressed the intercom. Chloe, could you please show Ms. Sterling out and cancel my next appointment? I need a moment. Numbly, Caroline rose. Her legs felt like they were made of lead. She gathered her expensive leather-bound proposal, which now felt as worthless as a stack of blank paper. She walked toward the door, her gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet the piercing eyes of the man who had just dismantled her entire existence. As her hand touched the cool metal of the door handle, James spoke one last time. For your own information, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the finality of an executioner, you should know that this is no longer a private matter. The story is on the BBC, The Guardian, and the New York Times online. It appears another passenger on the flight filmed your exit. Your name and the name of your firm are now attached to the story. The world is much smaller and far more transparent than you imagine. The door closed behind her. She was back in the opulent reception area. The hushed, expensive silence felt accusatory. Chloe, the assistant, looked up at her, her expression a careful professional mask that couldn't quite hide the pity and contempt in her eyes. The walk to the elevator was the longest of Caroline's life, a true walk of shame past priceless art and furniture that now seemed to mock her. The elevator's descent felt like a plunge into a personal hell. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock it. He was right. It wasn't just a blog anymore. Her name, Caroline Sterling, was trending on Twitter alongside hashtags like #airline, Karen #Apex Angel, and for first-class bigot. She clicked on a link to a major news site. There at the top of the page was her professional headshot, the one she'd paid thousands for, right next to a grainy, blown-up still from the passenger's video. In the video, her face was contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, her mouth open, shouting at the calm, impassive flight attendant. She pressed play. The audio was horribly clear. Her own shrill voice, dripping with entitlement, echoed in the quiet elevator. "This is unacceptable. I pay for an experience." The clip ended with scattered applause from other passengers as she was led away. She scrolled down, her stomach churning. The comments section was a raging torrent of digital vitriol, thousands of comments, mocking her, vilifying her, dissecting her. Her business website, the one with glowing testimonials she had so carefully curated, had a new banner across the top. This website is temporarily unavailable due to unusually high traffic. It had crashed. She stumbled out of the elevator and into the grand lobby of the Ethelred building. The security guard at the front desk looked at her, then quickly looked away, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. She was a spectacle. She pushed through the revolving doors and onto the street, the cold London drizzle, a welcome shock to her system. She stood there, untethered, as the city swirled around her, a ghost in the machine she thought she had mastered. Her phone buzzed. It was Jean-Luc, the CEO of her largest client, a prestigious Swiss watchmaker. "Caroline," he said, his voice icy without preamble. "I have just been sent a most disturbing video. Is it you?" "Jean-Luc, let me explain." "There is nothing to explain." He cut her off. "Our brand is built on a century of quiet dignity and respect. Your actions are the antithesis of that. We are terminating our contract effective immediately. A formal notice is on its way. Do not contact us again." The line went dead. Before she could even process it, another call came in. And another. Her life's work, a meticulously built house of cards, was being blown down in a single sustained gust of consequence. She finally hailed a taxi, collapsing into the back seat. The Savoy, she whispered the name of her hotel, tasting like ash. The leather-bound proposal lay on the seat beside her, a tombstone for her dead career. As the cab crawled through the relentless traffic, she caught her reflection in the window. She saw a pale, haunted woman, stripped of her armor of privilege, her carefully constructed world in ruins. She hadn't just been deplaned. She hadn't just lost a contract. She had been ejected from her own life. The ambiance she had so desperately sought to control was her own toxic echo chamber, and the real world diverse, interconnected, and ultimately just had finally shattered it. There was no one to sue, no one to fire, no one to blame. There was only the stark, undeniable truth reflected in the rain-streaked window. This was the hard, cold, inevitable crash landing she had piloted herself. The story of Caroline Sterling isn't just about one woman's downfall. It's a powerful, real-world reminder that character is who you are when you think no one important is watching. Captain Evans's response shows us that integrity isn't a passive quality. It's an active choice, a line drawn in the sand. And the Williams family's grace teaches us that dignity is the most powerful shield against hatred. In our interconnected world, the consequences of our actions ripple outwards in ways we can never predict. And sometimes karma doesn't wait for the next life to deliver its verdict. What did you think of the pilot's actions? Have you ever witnessed a moment like this, where someone stood up and did the right thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories about consequences, karma, and the moments that define us.